pressing.
Good morning. Sorry, we were running late. If you're seeing this and hearing this, please confirm in the comments. Thank you. Good morning and welcome to B-Cube Sunday Morning. I'm your third Sunday host, Cliff Winnig, and I have two wonderful guests here, Deborah J. Ross, returning guest, and Jacob Weisman, first-time guest. So let's talk a little bit about both of them. I'll start with the returning guest because she's returning. Deborah J. Ross is the award-nominated author of Collaborators out from Ciiff Press, which was nominated for the Lambda Award. And yep, there it is. That's the current edition, which is the author's preferred text edition.
And it's the one with the maps and the bonus material at the back. Yeah.
Nice. Not that the Ciiff Press edition was a poor edition. Yeah. It was a wonderful
Actually,
edition.
it was Dragon Moon was the original.
Oh, it's Dragon Moon. That's right. Yeah. Why am I thinking Ciiff? Probably because of the Lambda. My mistake. Dragon Moon Press edition, which was also a lovely edition. I have both. And she's also she also sometimes writes as Deborah Wheeler, and more recently as Deborah J. Ross. And her latest novel is Aralyn, out from Daw Books. I got that one right.
Actually, no.
It's not. It's not Daw.
Sorry.
Oh, it's from Okay, who is it from?
The MCB Literary Works.
The Trust, the Literary Trust.
Yeah, okay. It is the last Darkover novel.
The final Darkover novel. Yeah. So it's your last chance to read a new Darkover novel. So you should totally do that. You've done 9 of them, right? 3 trilogies.
Yes. Yeah,
yes.
and
got that one right.
Edited a whole bunch.
Adding 300.
Yeah.
What?
Edited a bunch of anthologies too.
And you edited a bunch of anthologies. Yes, she is also an editor. Speaking of editors, we have with us new guest, editor and publisher Jacob Weisman, who founded Tachyon Publications 30 years ago, a press that has won many awards, Hugos and Nebulas and things like that. That's the books that it's published have won these awards. That is, publishes wonderful people like Brandon Sanderson and Nancy Kress and too many wonderful authors to name. Jacob, name 2 or 3 other ones. Oh, Peter S. Beagle, who their logo is based on the rhinoceros who quoted Nietzsche. So they also are the sponsor of SF and SF, Science Fiction in San Francisco, a wonderful monthly reading series that's been going on for 20 years or over 20 years now at this point. And Jacob, in addition to being a publisher and editor for Tachyon, is the co-author of Egyptian Motherlode with David Sandner. That's out from Fairwood Press just a few months ago with a really nice cover, but also good stuff inside the book. So thank you both for coming.
Thank you,
Bob
Cliff.
is a little bit under the weather today, so I apologize for that to all our regular viewers, and know that we all wish Bob to get better sooner rather than later. So here we are. I'm going to basically be doing much of Bob's intro stuff and outstuff today, and I'm sorry we were running a few minutes late. Love to see everyone in the chat. All right, so today is a couple of different holidays. If you are not Eastern Orthodox Christian, it's Easter, and if you are Eastern Orthodox Christian, you're on the Julian calendar, and it's a few weeks down the road. But anyway, but it's also if you are Jewish and in diaspora, the 8th and final day of Passover, which is what gave me the idea for today's topic, which is Exodus. Now, there is the book of Exodus about the Israelite exodus from Egypt into, 40 years of wandering the desert, and then If you look at Google Maps or some other maps, Apple Maps, you'll see that it's not a really big desert, but they somehow wandered for 40 years and arrived eventually in the land of Canaan. But the idea that I had is, let's talk about science fiction, fantasy, horror, mostly science fiction and fantasy, where the protagonists are on a one-way trip. They're on an exodus. Something has happened. And I'm thinking something like Tau Zero by Paul Anderson, where they're going very distant in time and space and they're not coming back. Another example would be The Forever War by Joe Haldeman, because even though they do come back to Earth at the end, it's not the Earth they left. Time dilation has occurred. Things are very, very different. As Thomas Wolfe wrote, you can't go home again. So even if you do physically come home, you can't. A metaphorical exodus occurs at the end of The Lord of the Rings, where, spoiler alert, Frodo is not the Frodo who left. And the Shire isn't quite the Shire he left, but it recovers, right? There's the scouring of the Shire in the book version. But either way, Sam kind of comes home and integrates and has a family and becomes mayor of Hobbiton and stuff. But Frodo, he's kind of metaphorically dead. He doesn't survive, really. He goes off and he never regains his life. And he sails off to the west, which is metaphorically kind of like death. I mean, it's not within Tolkien's theology, not exactly death, but we could talk about that. And some of the others eventually do as well. Gandalf, the elves, Gimli and Legolas, and so on and so forth. So that's a kind of metaphorical exodus where you've left and then you come home, but you're not really home because home ain't there no more for you. Might be there for someone else. But anyway, that's the subject, and there's a lot of examples that we could use. So anyone want to dive in and talk about some of their favorite stories of like one-way journeys in science fiction, fantasy literature, or even mainstream literature? You can go there.
Well, I was thinking of Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey.
Sure.
I disagree with a lot about, but got one thing right, which is that a character leaves home and then things happen to them and then they come back. The same person does not come back to the same place. And it could be for more than one reason. It could be that the person has changed. It could be that the place has changed. I think even without the traumatic changes, for instance, in the Shire, in Lord of the Rings, life goes on. So I think any of us who've had the experience of going on a prolonged vacation, or I lived in France for 9 months in 1991, and let me tell you, it did not feel the same. Some of it was reverse culture shock, which is a change in me, but some of it was the neighborhood had moved on. People had come and gone. There were political changes in 1991, for sure. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just going to stop there and let Jacob start talking.
Well, I guess, the first thing that comes to mind are Generation Starship stories, which have been around for a long time. I think A.E. Van Vogt might have written the first one, which you're set off on such a long journey that right, it's your descendants are going to be the ones who actually land on the alien planet. And in that one, the twist, which was revolutionary at the time, but maybe not so much now, was that the colonists arrive only to find that they've been beaten there by like hundreds of years or thousands of years because instantaneous travel was invented after they left, and so they're greeted by a civilization that they were not expecting to find. Um, Robert Heinlein's Orphans of the Sky, which I only remember in like bits and pieces, but uh, was one of my favorite books growing up. Um, More recently, Frank Robinson's The Dark Between the Stars was just
Yeah.
a beautiful book. Um, so you have those, but I was actually interested that you mentioned the Forever War because I would not have thought of the Forever War, but it is because of time dilation. You're just moving forward and forward and forward, and there is no going back. It's a it's a one-way time machine, and I think that's uh, a fascinating way to think of this because I think there's a lot more work than the Generation Starship stories that opens up.
Yeah, on the time travel thing, even the Time Machine by H.G. Wells is kind of a personal exodus, right? Like he goes way far into the future, falls in love with Weena, does go back home, and is home in his own time with his own people, but he's too restless. He wants to go back and try and rescue Weena, and when I say go back, go forward, what is it, 800,000 years or something. And so he leaves forever, right? Like he doesn't come back. The narrator, who knows the time traveler, knows that he never comes home. So that's a one-way trip. The British band, the Electric Light Orchestra, after their heyday, did an album in 1981 called Time. And time involves, there's an experiment being conducted in the year 2095, a time travel experiment that accidentally scoops up our hero from 1981 and propels him into 2095. And all the culture shock and all the missing, all the people in the home. And there's even a song where he does go back to his old neighborhood, like you experienced, Deborah. And it's like, I guess I'm the stranger here because like everyone else is like, who are all these strangers? But I guess it's me, you know. Um, and so that's yeah. I mean, in England, there's a greater chance that the neighborhood you return to actually has the same buildings than it would be in the United States, but the people are all different. Um,
And there are
so,
going to be subtle differences in the buildings too,
well, yeah,
because each inhabitant of that building over a finite lifespan is going to modify it, whether it's
absolutely.
internal decorations or outside paint or breaking down walls or whatever they happen to be.
Yeah, but it might be more recognizable in America. They might just bulldoze the whole neighborhood or whatever, right? Like that's a thing. So those are good exile stories. And there is an
There's
ambiguous ending.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's an exile story that came to my mind, which is
yeah.
that my entry drug into the world of science fiction and fantasy. I mean, I had absolutely bounced off Highline as a teenager,
Mm.
no connection whatsoever. Would rather read a good dog story. But then because I was also
Did
horse
Heinlein
racing,
write a good dog story at
I
some point?
picked up Andre Norton's The Beastmaster, which has horses in it.
Oh.
And the thing that just grabbed me as a teenager was that in this story, Earth has been destroyed and it is
Hmm.
impossible to go home. And so the central character is trying to recreate a home, is trying to find a home. Um, and I think, first of all, it's the impossibility in that situation of going home. That's literal. But also that's something that we do in our lives, in our imagination. But the home that we remember is not the exact home um, externally, objectively. It's
Sure.
our experiences and our emotions, and those lenses, highly colored lenses, highly selective memory, shape the idea of an experience. It's like a platonic experience instead of what was really going on. And I think we've all had the experience of saying, well, do you remember this thing that happened when I was 6? And an adult will say, it didn't happen that way. Or somebody else who was there say, it
Yeah.
that I don't remember it that way.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like what happens when we write a story, which is that like we have this technicolor movie between our ears, and we use words, images, and plot, and characterization, and dialogue, and all of those other tools to create a thing that evokes an experience in the mind of the reader. But the two experiences are not the same because we each bring all of our life experiences and our hopes and dreams and nightmares and everything else to those interpretations. So I think our memories of home are shaped in very much the same way.
Which is
Even if we
also
go back to exactly the same situation, exactly the same people, exactly the same favorite foods, whatever, it wouldn't be the same because of that disconnect between internal and external reality. Shut up now.
nice. And also, I'll add, when you reread a book, you're not the same person,
Ah, yes.
right? So you have a beloved book that you reread every year or whatever. And I know you've reread The Lord of the Rings a number of times, and it's always different, right? And then you also notice different things that you didn't catch the last time because they weren't speaking to you yet, you know, or
Or you remember, or you go back and you reread a book that you absolutely loved as a teenager or a young adult, and you go,
yeah.
"Oh my God, I am so embarrassed that I thought this was wonderful."
Yeah, and I mean, we've all had examples of things where the culture has moved on, right? Like, I know I've um introduced my kids to a few of my favorite things, and oftentimes they worked out, right? Like Tolkien or whatever. But the culture has changed. So, like, when I read my daughter's The Hobbit, one of them was like, "Why are there no girls in this book?" Like, immediately in like chapter one, and I'm like, "Yeah." Well, I explained to her Tolkien, like World War I, bonding with his male companions in World War I and his male schoolmates, and how that affected his life, affected his mind, which affected the book. And I gave her like the historical answer, and then we read some stuff with women in it. But I mean, I had to like do that, right? Other things that are a little, what the kids would call cringe now, that weren't cringe at the time.
Mhm.
You know, there are some just the like gender relations in books that I've been reading or rereading from the 70s and 80s, and it's just like, ooh, not so good. Gender essentialism, right? Like, there are two genders, and that's it,
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah.
there's like magic systems that depend on it, right? Like Wheel of Time has like men's magic and women's magic and stuff like that. And
Well, what you also have to remember is, right, you read, let's say, The Lord of the Rings, probably late 70s, early 80s, I would
yeah,
guess.
yeah, I was a kid, so yeah, yeah,
So at that
late
point, the
70s.
books were like 20,
Lord of the
22
Rings was
years old.
20, Hobbit was like 40 at that
Yeah. Uh, but you add 45 years to that, that those books are now, 65, 85 years ago.
Yeah,
And and that would be more equivalent to like us reading like H. Rider Haggard,
Yeah.
Mm.
right?
Well, I was just reading.
That's how
Yeah.
removed, you know, those works now are, and a lot of that stuff, Wells still reads fine, but a lot of the other stuff from the late 1900s does not.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, I was just reading about The Great Gatsby, which turns 100 this year, and was considerably younger when I first read it. And I read it a couple times, and uh, it's well. First of all, it is an Exodus kind of story. Gatsby is trying to get back to the relationship he had with the Daisy he thought he knew, right? And she has moved on. He went to war and she moved on and she married Tom, and she's much more compatible with Tom than she is with Jay. And that's unfortunately Jay doesn't really recognize that. And it's a tragic one-way journey where he's kind of still in World War One and he's kind of still in pre-war. Um, another kind of Exodus story is Gone with the Wind, where Scarlett O'Hara doesn't actually leave Tara, but the whole world changes around her. Her world disintegrates.
It's like Tara leaves her.
Yeah, kind of, right? Like the world goes on its Exodus, and she's still there, and doesn't recognize the improvements, right? Because she is stuck in the class and racism system of her youth. But there's lately, to pick up something Jacob said, there's lately a whole bunch of science fiction books about the Earth being destroyed and humans having to make their way in the galaxy without the Earth, or the Earth being not available. Like there was a movie a long time ago, Titan AE, an animated movie about that. That starts with the Earth being blown up, and for example, Adrian Tchaikovsky has some recent trilogy about that, where the Earth is like made into a giant art object by aliens, inscrutable aliens, and the art object requires reshaping the planet in such a way that it can no longer support life. Um, and Gareth L. Powell, another British writer, his Stars and Bones and Descendant Machine duology starts with not the Earth being destroyed, but humanity is about to start a nuclear war, and a godlike alien takes umbrage at our stewardship of the planet over that, halts the bombs, but kicks humans off the Earth and puts them into a sort of Battlestar Galactica-like fleet of ships, and says, "You can go anywhere in the galaxy you want except Earth." And I'll let you take some monuments like the Great Pyramid and the Lincoln Memorial and whatever, but the planet, nope. You know, um, things like that. And I think Future's Edge, his latest, has a like a blown up the Earth theme.
Mm-hmm.
So, and of course, one of the more famous ones is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where a Vogat constructor fleet blows up the Earth to make way for a hyperspace bypass. Not even a hyperspace freeway, a bypass. And so, forcing our hero, Arthur Dent, to go off in the galaxy in search of a cup of tea, which he can't seem to find anywhere other than the Earth.
I just finished reading Claire Rudy Foster's The Rain Artist. Earth isn't exactly destroyed, but it is so heavily polluted that, for instance, the whales are all gone because the ocean is too saline for mammals to live in.
Oh,
And
wow.
the super, super, super rich hold rain parties because there is no rain. There is no water pure enough to be rain. And the central character is an umbrella maker, and almost nobody except these quadrillionaires even know what an umbrella is. And the world's wealthiest family lives in this enclave where they actually have gardens with flowers and artificial rain and stuff like that.
Sure.
It's I'm trying to think of how this is. You can't go home again. You can't undo certain kinds of damage. It's a there's a point of no return, and it may
Yeah.
be stable or it may be a vicious cycle that just keep getting worse and worse and worse until there's no life at all on Earth. The time span of the novel is too short to be able to tell if that's true or not.
So Jack Williamson, who coined the term terraforming, wrote a book toward the end of his life called Terraforming Earth, that was originally some stories published. By the way, he wanted to call it Terraforming Terra, but his editor changed it to Terraforming Earth. I'm still not sure how I feel about that. But anyway, it was takes place after the Earth has been made uninhabitable, and it's generations of people on a moon base doing the work to terraform Earth back to an inhabitable Earth, right? So that's a kind of I mean, obviously the Earth that they're going to get back is not the same as the Earth that was originally there, exactly, right? And then there's a wonderful novel by Clifford Simak called Cemetery World, which is based on the idea, like if you're Jewish, sometimes you want to get buried in Israel, right? Like that's a thing that happens. And this is like if you're human and you're out in the galaxy, you want to get buried on Earth. So the entire planet Earth is now run by a funeral home, and they get shipments of bodies for burial on Earth, and they have robots to do the burying. And this guy, the protagonist, I forget, I think he's like a reporter of some kind, and he's doing an article on it, and he goes and he explores, and interesting things happen. So again, it's Earth, and it is a kind of homecoming, but it's not the Earth that anyone would recognize, right? It's all manicured lawns and marble monuments, and it's very nice. There aren't any people or cities or anything. I'd like to differentiate. I'm going to go back to for those who came late, we're discussing the concept of Exodus in science fiction and fantasy and other literature. And I'd like to differentiate between the expulsion from the Garden of Eden and the Exodus as archetypes. Because in the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, which a lot of these like Earth got blowed up stories are, you have this like nice past, right? Where you're happy and everything is peachy and there are even peach trees. And then you are kicked out on this one-way trip. But Exodus is more like things are bad, right? And they're getting worse. You're slaves in Egypt, your firstborn have to get killed, whatever. And you really want to just go off and do your own thing without being oppressed by Pharaoh. And so Exodus is kind of a journey from the bad to whatever, hopefully better, right? You're not sure when you start out on the journey if it's going to be better, but you're hoping that it gets better. In the Bible, it gets better, but not always in real life. So that's another distinction we can make, right? Like, so, in a way, Frodo's like kicked out of Eden, although he does go to Valinor, which could be considered better than the Shire. And like in the Forever War, they do come back to Earth, but they were sort of, I don't know if Earth was paradise when they left. I get the impression it was not. So there is that.
Well, there was a war going on.
Yeah, there was a war going on. I will also add that I have this. Jacob's wife Rena gave me this, or Jacob, I guess, too. Rena picked it out for Hanukkah one year. These are all the rovers that were on Mars at the time of So Sojourner in Spirit and Opportunity and Curiosity and Perseverance. They are on an exodus, right? They are fulfilling their purpose on Mars, but they ain't coming back to Earth unless, like, hundreds of years in the future, they get moved to a museum or something. But probably they'll just be in a museum on Mars. And so that's another example of Exodus.
Yeah, there's also this huge, for want of a better term, there's the whole kind of civil rights aspect of this thing too.
Yeah. Talk.
Well, I mean, it's a fascinating thing because you have this whole Judeo-Christian thing that emerges, and buried right in the middle of it is this text, which is like, if you're enslaved and whatever, here's your, this isn't right, and here's your blueprint. You need to get out and you need to leave. And it's kind of a fascinating thing. I don't know how much of that actually translates to science fiction. Certainly, Cordwainer Smith's, like, the Ballad of Lost Camel, which is probably more about Martin Luther King than it is about Moses.
Sure.
But that would be one work. Camel is is basically a cat woman who has been elevated so that she has intelligence and speech, and she is one of a class of under people, which are all elevated animals who are not given rights in the instrumentality of mankind.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that. There's just, it's a huge text that can be opened up. I don't remember your daughters when they did their bat mitzvah, right? They read from Exodus.
Yeah, the part of the 10 plagues. I think 7 of the 10 plagues.
Yeah, and when I did my bar mitzvah, I read. My portion was from Exodus, and it was it was Moses getting the instructions to remake the tablets and go out. It was the Mel Brooks.
These 15.
Right? I bring you these 15. Oops. 10 commandments.
Right.
So I mean, there's just a large, it's just a huge subject, right? I mean, you can come at this from any number of angles.
Sure. They're talking in the chat about Paradise, which reminds me of Paradise Lost by Milton, where Lucifer is kind of the hero and he's lost paradise, and he says it's better to rule in hell than serve in heaven, but he's kind of rationalizing, and I think that's pretty clear. Right? Like, because he doesn't have a choice anymore. So there's that. Yeah, I mean,
to admit I might have made a mistake.
Yeah, right. But like, he's full of toxic masculinity. Yeah, I mean, he is the devil. But there's interesting because, like, in the concept of the Exodus in a biblical story, they start as Israelites, we, whoever, start as slaves and get their freedom and go and leave. Whereas the experience of Martin Luther King's ancestors, of African Americans, is that they were in, Africa and then taken as slaves, and they're slaves here. After their exodus was really the Middle Passage, right? And then they were slaves, and they had to free themselves after the exodus, right? And then stay here because there wasn't any going back to Africa, at least not, in any large numbers, hundreds of years later. And then, of course, once they were freed, they threw off slavery. There were still more layers of that onion, right? And so hence, like, Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Act. And right now, there's a whole lot of, I mean, we're seeing in this country just how much racism there is embedded in American society, how deep it is. And so the promise of the good part of Exodus, which is becoming free people, is still not fulfilled. There's also, like, I look at American history, the Trail of Tears, and other forced migrations of Native Americans from one part of the continent to another, right? And that was an exodus, although more of a expulsion from Eden than an exodus kind of thing. And now they're, on reservations or whatever, and there's, it took a long time to get the right to vote for Native Americans and things of that nature. And there's still, like this epidemic of disappearance of Native women that, is a nice euphemism for covering like kidnappings and murders, right? That are way statistically higher than other populations in this country. So it's an ongoing thing, right? And that was true in the Bible too, right? Like, you got to Canaan, but hey, there were people there. And then there was that struggle, right? And not one of the prettier parts of the Bible. They blew the horns and the walls came down in Jericho and whatnot. And then, you read the book of Judges and it's here, this people conquered and then we were liberated, and that people conquered and then we were liberated, and this people conquered. There is no end to history, right? I remember when the Soviet Union fell, there was this one historian who's like, okay, history's over. It's now just, American capitalism forever, right?
The promise of postmodernism.
Yeah. And now we're in postmodernism. And, now we're back to like the rise of global fascism. And my dad, who's 91, has seen this before, right? But not everyone, but it's, my contention is it's happening now because it's been like 80 years and most of the people my dad's age are dead. And so people have forgotten how bad it went, right? There's a series, Terry Goodkind series, that starts with Wizard's First Rule. And while I don't necessarily recommend the series, I did read the first book to see why it was popular. And about 3/4 of the way, you get to Wizard's First Rule, right? And the wizard mentor is like, we have a bunch of rules as wizards. First one, people are stupid. And the hero's like, that's your rule? It's like, yeah. Like the more you look, the more you realize this is true and it's important. So yeah, we see that all the time in the real world. So yeah, I mean, the thing about an exodus is that one, it's a one-way journey, and two, you don't quite know what's going to happen when you get there, right? And it's full of, and the journey itself is scary, it's terrifying, right? Like in the biblical Exodus, they go out into the desert and they are harassed by Amalek, who's like killing their stragglers, right? And they don't have any food and they have to depend on manna, or man in Hebrew. And they, it's not great. And then they finally get, it takes them 40 years. So the people it's a generation ship, right? So the people who left are not the people who arrive. And even their leader, Moses, does not get to go, right? He shepherds them, but he doesn't get to go into the promised land. He gets a vision of it from a hilltop, but that's about it. And then he dies, and it's the thing about an exodus is it's often the people who are like, well, let's try and make this a better journey. They don't necessarily, they're not the ones to benefit, right? I'm doing a reread of Octavia E. Butler's Parable of the Sower in real time, which is to say the novel is set between the years 2024 and 2027. And I'm rereading each passage on the day their diary entries. So rereading each passage on the day that they're set and kind of comparing her future that she envisioned in the 1990s with reality. And there are differences and there are similarities, and it's a really interesting exercise. But
it's a little scary, isn't it?
yeah. Her protagonist goes from a walled community, which could be seen as like a garden, and it's destroyed, right? And she has to go. It hasn't happened yet, by the way. The destruction hasn't happened yet. That's in later, I think later this year, in real time. But she has to go on a journey, and then she wants to take humanity into space, and she forms this religion to do that. And Octavia, I was reading about the third book in the series that Octavia spent a lot of time working on, but never finished. And one of the things that kept coming up in her various drafts were it takes place on a different planet. And the descendants, the followers of the religion, who are not the people alive in the first book, are, it's hundreds of years later. And they're on a different planet. And yes, they're following the Earthseed religion, but the conditions on the planet really suck. And different drafts of the book had different suckitude, right? But it was environmentally not suited to humans the way Earth is, because right? And because Octavia was relentless in the way she approached science fiction, she wasn't going to give them anything. So they have to deal. They're there. They've done the Exodus. Now they've arrived at wherever the heck they are, and they have to deal with that. Yeah, Liam says in the comments, it's like watching Blade Runner. I would say it's like watching Blade Runner in the year 2019. I also, on January 1st, 1997, I had an Escape from New York party because it's set in 1997. And the opening sequence says 1988, New York crime rate rises, whatever, and ends with 1997 now. So January 1st, 1997, I invited my friends over. There's a pizzeria in San Francisco called Escape from New York Pizza. We got Escape from New York Pizza. We got the movie. We had a whole themed party.
So something you said, Ciiff, reminded me, talking about this group of people in Exodus, that I think the phenomenon of going home is different for a group than for an individual. Because an individual has a very specific and unique to that individual vision of what home is and longing inside. Not everybody likes mom's apple pie, but with a group, you have many, many pieces of that. So if you found a home, you were able to go home that was home for the group, nobody would be satisfied, because it would be this massive compromise. Things would be blurred and nobody would get exactly what they wanted.
That's kind of how the Bible went.
Yeah, right. Well, even at the point that there were some people who were, oh yes, we're trudging through the desert, we're blah 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 blah, and other people are just kvetching the entire time.
Oh yeah, which is like one of the most realistic depictions of mass humanity ever written.
Right. Right, and you just know they are not going to be happy no matter what they find.
And the golden calf, that's an attempt to go back home again. Right? They're used to idols and gods made out of very fancy god idols. There's a cow god that was very big in ancient Egypt, goddess, that may have been the inspiration for the golden calf, but there was, her cult was huge, over centuries. And so, that's a familiar thing, right? Like they're homesick in a way, right? And when Moses goes up into the mountain, doesn't come down and doesn't come down and doesn't come down and doesn't send any text and doesn't respond to voicemails, the emails bounce, they get nervous and they're like, well, this new thing sucks. Let's maybe try going back home again, right? And that doesn't work.
And the new thing is what? We have to do something. We have to change.
Yeah. I mean, it's very patriarchal. Well, Egypt wasn't really matriarchal though. I mean, they did have goddesses, but they were very patriarchal too. There were some. It might have been one or two female pharaohs, but most of them were boys. But I don't know. I haven't done an exhaustive study of ancient Near East matriarchy versus patriarchy society. I don't know what. I'm pretty sure the big city states like and Akkad and all were pretty patriarchal, but there might have been high priestesses that were like opposite in power with the king. I think I read something about that. Anyway, yeah, and humanity has had this exodus from the Fertile Crescent, right? And so we've spread out, and there's no kind of going back. America, the United States, is made up, other than the Native Americans, who are not the majority of the population by numbers, for various reasons having to do with evil. There's a lot of us on this continent who are from somewhere else ancestrally, and that's a one trip.
All
right?
of us.
Yeah, right. Anyone who isn't a Native American is like their ancestors came from somewhere else. So,
usually when something bad had happened.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
This is true.
Absolutely. Or when conditions were just bad. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So like, my grandparents were tired of pogroms and the Tsar. And so, for example.
That's an interesting twist on the concept of longing to go home.
Mm-hmm.
All the people, it's like, you could not pay me enough money to go back to Tsar.
Fair, right? Yeah, and yeah, and even if you did get paid enough money, there might not be a there in the sense that after your family left whatever the old country is to you, right? The literal buildings, farmlands, or whatever are now inhabited by people other than your family, right? Unless there was a branch that just stayed and they're still around. But even they're the cousins who own the land and you are the cousins who do not, right? So it's not like you can come right back. Although there's some, like, I remember reading about some certain villages in Europe that have been depopulated are like, we'll sell you this house for €1 and you come and take over and revitalize our village, kind of thing. There's periodic offers like that. But for the most part, that's not the case, right? And the thing about immigrants, because like the immigrant experience, is that the strength of the United States was basically that it was all these immigrants, right? And different perspectives and different life experiences. And you come into contact with other people who have different life experiences and different backgrounds, and that makes you uncomfortable, but you have to deal with it. So you deal with it, and it makes the whole society stronger, right? So there's that tapestry that results. There's in the biblical exile, the Israelites left Egypt, came to Canaan, took over, right? Killed everyone, took over, and were there. But in real life, that doesn't really happen as much, right? Even if you're an empire and you're conquering, you don't wipe out the indigenous people entirely. You just take over the leadership structure and run your empire, right? And so, not moral, but also it does cause these it's a difference, right? It causes these cultural connections. Like, for example, the Mughal empire in northern India, right? They took over, the Muslim Moguls took over from the Hindu Rajas and created their own court system with some excellent music, by the way. I studied North Indian classical music for many years, and the court of Akbar the Great, my particular musical lineage traces it back to Mian Tansen, the court musician 400 years ago in the court of Akbar the Great, the Mughal ruler. So there can be some really positive things that come out of this here or there, because people are people, and things are generally not 100% negative and generally not 100% positive. So I like the books, getting back to literature, that reflect the complexity of that, right? Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion, which is really one book split by the publisher. There is this idea, and you find out more about it, but this idea of the big mistake. No one can go back to Earth because of something called the big mistake. And part of the plot is finding out what the big mistake was and what happened. But the idea is that Earth is gone, and humans are on like 7 or 8 planets that they found, and they have these FTL gates that they can go from planet to planet. But there aren't a lot of planets in the galaxy that are really well suited to human life. And, there's like 8. So, but they're not Earth. None of them are Earth. They're all very different in a way, right?
That brings up an interesting question. So whether it's on one planet or multiple planets, you have an indigenous culture, you have invaders who then become occupiers, who then become rulers. So what does going home mean to those two groups? The occupiers, this is our home now, we call the shots. Maybe there's some we were in a horrible place and now we're in a great place. I don't know. But the people who are being occupied, the underclass, the slaves, they're physically home, but their dreams are going to be of freedom and of the culture and social situations that were before the invaders came.
Yeah.
And so that reminds me of Kate Elliott's trilogy, Court of Fives. It's YA, but it's terrific. And it's the illusion is of the conquerors and the conquered being an integrated society, but it's not that way at all. And the way the conquerors have taken the core religious beliefs and magical systems of the conquered people and adapted them, perverted them, retranslated them to fit in, to justify the occupation is quite fascinating.
Well, that reminds me of Collaborators, right?
Yeah, that's a little bit more like we come in peace. Oops, you ungrateful people, you're being violent. Whap, whap, whap. We will be violent back.
Yeah, I mean, different species, so that's part of the difference there. But reminds me of that parody novelty song, Star Trekkin'. We come in peace, shoot to kill, shoot to kill, shoot to kill. Yeah, I mean, the Roman Empire would, conquer a people and then replace their religion. They would like link their pantheon to the Roman gods and take it over, right?
So where I lived in France was Lyon, which was not only the center of the French resistance to the Nazi occupation, but it was the capital of Gaul. And there were places. One of my favorite places was it wasn't a cathedral. It was a big church that dated back, I think, to the 1200s. And it was built on, and there were still some ruins in the garden of a 4th century CE church. And that was built on the ruins of what they were calling a pagan temple from, I think, 2000 BCE. It was just these layers.
Sure.
It was like incrustations one on top of the other. And if you didn't know that this went back way before the Romans, this place of civilization, because it's at the confluence of 2 major rivers, all you would see is, oh, isn't it this a nice Catholic church?
Right. Yeah. You see the top layer. Or sometimes it's just the same building, like the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul was built as a church. And then when the Ottomans took over, it became a mosque and they added minarets, but they kept the original building that was a church. And then by the time I visited it, it was a museum. I believe Erdogan has turned it back into a mosque, but it was a museum to itself, right? And it talked about its own history as a church and then a mosque and now a museum. And that was in case of like not like building over the ruins of an older structure, but just keeping the building and modifying it, repurposing it, which happens here, right? Like congregations abandon their structures and other congregations take over, and sometimes they're different religions. Synagogue gets reconsecrated as a church, church gets reconsecrated as a synagogue, that sort of thing. You know, Jacob, are there other examples that you want to mention? We're kind of wrapping up. We started a few minutes late, so I'm ending a few minutes late.
Examples of which type of Exodus?
Any type. It's just that Deborah and I have been talking a lot. I want to get you in to the conversation more.
Well, I mean, we were talking about generation starships earlier, and one of my absolute favorites is actually a book that we published, The Freeze Frame Revolution by Peter Watts, which opens with this just beautiful description of, well, I should preface it by saying the way Peter has his generation starship set up is that they're basically there's a crew that's going through and they're basically building like wormholes as they go. They left Earth, they've lost contact with Earth a long time ago. There's 30,000 crew members on this asteroid that's being, going through space, and there's an artificial intelligence that's running everything, and it only, so everyone is kind of in cold sleep, except that when it needs someone, it'll wake someone up for a day or two, and then put them back under. But because there's 30,000 of them, they're going to go a long time. So when the book opens, they've been traveling for 66 million years.
Wow.
And the main character of that story has this beautiful soliloquy where she talks about how she liked to compare how long they've been traveling to the history of civilization, and she says, well, I didn't even wake up the first time until the Ice Age. It's just this beautiful description, and of course it's part of a series, so that whether any of this is successful or where they end up, because their mission is really just to kind of build these starports. So they're just they go for a while, then they stop and they build something and they keep going. So there's no end. And so in that section, actually, the crew decides that they want to overthrow the AI and take control of the ship. But the problem is, right, you're only awake for a day every few thousand years. How do you communicate with the rest of the crew and not with the AI?
Wow. That's pretty cool.
And
So
so
like they're
that's,
building these starports, but no one's using them because no one, yeah.
yeah, they have no
Pointless.
evidence that there's anything left back on Earth.
Right.
There could be.
Right. But and that's a perfect example of an AI because the AI is just like, I have a mission. I'm executing my programming. Yeah. There's another kind of travel through time one. Roger Zelazny wrote a story called The Graveyard Heart about the party set. And the party set were a bunch of idle rich who would go into cryonic sleep for months, maybe a year, and then come out and have a party that was live streamed to the world, and everyone would watch them be witty and charming, and to the rest of the world, ageless, because every year they would age a day or two, right? Because they were in frozen sleep and then coming out and partying, and the world kept changing. Right around them, and it was eventually republished as a kind of an ace double kind of thing with a sequel story by, in this case, Walter John Williams. It was part of a series where famous stories were getting sequels, and I love the Walter John Williams sequel because it talks about at some point the party goers realize that for some time now, the rest of the world has been pretending to be normal humans for their sake. That when they interact with, but they've evolved into like these kinds of other beings and discovered parallel universes and done all this weird stuff. But they're sort of keeping the party set as this group of people in a bubble to hide from them the fact that the whole world has completely changed out from under them, so that they're not too uncomfortable.
Well, and it's a false way of securing your immortality, right?
Right.
You go to sleep and you wake up and years have passed. If you hadn't, you'd be dead. On the other hand, subjectively, it's the same lifespan.
Right. Yeah. It's all perspective. Right. But it's also the interesting thing about that story is it's a group of people, the party set, and they are on this, exodus together. Right. For whatever reason, they have all chosen to join this group and separate themselves in time from everyone they knew. There was a story I read that was really lovely that I read it in, I think, Asimov's or FNSF, and I don't remember who wrote it. So if anyone in the audience recognizes it, please let me know. But the idea was on Earth, it had become pastoral. And the only place you could get cities were the colony worlds. And there was no FTL. So if you went to a colony world, it was a one-way trip on a starship going close to the speed of light. But there were cities and a whole galaxy out there. And it's a love story. The story is about a love story between a guy and a woman. And the woman really is longing for the past that she's read about and seen in movies in which there were cities and stuff. And the guy likes the pastoral existence on Earth. And at one point, they're looking at a field of fireflies. And she's like, I wonder if the city lights looked like this, right, at night. And it's a really interesting thing. And then so she feels, I guess she's already on an exodus, but then one day he wakes up to a note from her saying, I've left. I'm on the starship. It left this morning. You're getting this hours later. And the reason I didn't tell you is that if I told you and you asked me to stay, I wouldn't be able to leave, because I love you so much. But I need this, and you need to stay because you will not be happy where I am happy. And it was really powerful, right? Because it was absolutely a one-way trip. And you think about those early 20th century immigrants who went on steamship and could write letters to home, but that was it. Like, you probably never saw your parents again or your siblings, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
my mom has had photographs of her grandparents, whom she never met, that went with my grandmother to my mom's mom to America, and it had, uh, in the way of 19th century people, it had these portraits, and it said, like, your mother, right, in Yiddish or German, whatever it was, and I would say German because it was written in Latin letters, and your father, right, and here they are, and that's it. You're on Exodus, and you go, and you're in America. I don't think she never saw her parents again. When I was a little kid, I used to play with she was from Latvia, and I used to play a game that I invented with my grandmother called Sailing to Europe, in which we go back and visit the home
Mhm.
that she came back from. But it never happened in real life. She never, ever went back to Latvia. And she lived to be about 100, and left when she was a teenager. So. And my other grandmother is Lithuanian, lived to be 3 weeks shy of 102, and she absolutely never went back to Lithuania. She lived in Milwaukee.
Well, there's probably nothing to go back to.
No, her village was gone.
Yeah.
But also she remembered Cossacks doing pogroms, and she did not want.
Yeah, my some of my grandparents are from Lithuania, and like I've tried to like figure out like where the village is, and I have like several names, and I can't match it to any map.
Yeah, you can't go home again. So, and I guess I'll end with this, and then ask my guests to end with their statements. And thank you all in the live studio audience. Sorry we were off to a late start, and thank you for staying with us for a late finish that makes it about an hour. We hope that you have enjoyed this discussion. Um, so what I'll say about Exodus is, I'm going to quote Buckaroo Banzai: "Wherever you go, there you are." Right? Right? Like, the people on the generation ship, well, they're there. They get to decide their fate, right? Um, uh, there's a wonderful novel, Adam uh, Oyebanji, in England, called Breaking Day, not daybreak, but like a car break, and it's about a generation ship that's accelerating half of the journey and decelerating half the journey, and breaking day is that midpoint. So it's about the generation that never saw Earth and is never going to see where they're going, and they're turning the ship around, and they're so that's kind of interesting. Anyway, so yeah, any last thoughts on Exodus, exile, expulsion from Eden, escaping uh, Egyptian slavery, anything like that, metaphorically? Deborah or Jacob, either one can go first. And then we will have the final question, which is, what do you want to plug? So, Deborah,
Um,
you want to go? Oh, Jacob, you want to go? Go.
well, I think the interesting thing about something like this is the time that it takes. Right, we're talking about there's the slavery in Egypt, the actual Exodus, the 40 the 40 years wandering in the desert, and usually a story a story is set somewhere in that frame, but it's usually it's not because it's such a long process. It's not usually uh, entirely linear. Usually, you're starting at a point within it, which I think is very interesting in terms of storytelling.
Sure.
Right? That you said breaking day. Right? It's
Right.
that's the halfway point. It's not it is neither the impetus to leave nor is it the arrival.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there was that TV show that Harlan Ellison so disavowed he had them use the Cordwainer Bird pen name for him called The Star Lost, in which it's one of those stories where you're on a generation ship, but you've forgotten you're on a generation ship. And it's about a guy who leaves his pod with his community, which is kind of Amish, like they're space Amish, and finds the spaceship is out there. And worse than that, the spaceship is off course and headed into a star, and they're going to have to do something.
Right. That was the Heinlein novel, Orphans of the Sky. They have to discover that they're on a spaceship to begin with, and so I remember there's a whole concept about the world is finite, right? It's bounded within these walls, and it's like,
Sure.
well, if you dug out part of the wall, where would you be?
Sure. Wherever you'd be, there you'd be. There you are.
Right, but it's also there's a greater world outside of that.
That's a good metaphor for many things. Deborah, any final thoughts on Exodus? Exodi?
Well, more generally, just first, when Jacob was talking, I was thinking of River Solomon's novel, Range of Ghosts, where, yes, there's an awareness that people are on a spaceship, but that's not where people live that's not the consciousness where people live their lives. So my thought is that even if we got to the land of milk and honey, and even if it was exactly what we had hoped for, it wouldn't stay that way, because we wouldn't stay that way. Our presence would change. And, just like the people that kvetched the whole 40 years. And I'm reminded of something that a friend of mine who has a Buddhist practice says. And she says, change is inevitable. Change is good. I will go kicking and screaming into change. And I think that's a statement about human nature, is that we have fixed ideas. They never stay the same. We kick up a fuss because our expectations, as is said, are premature resentments. So really the only way to go home is to have home be a fluid, flexible, and ever-changing experience of the heart.
Sounds good. I think that's a really brilliant way to end. Thank you for that. So I would, before we do the plugging, I would like to thank my guests, Deborah J. Ross and Jacob Weisman. You were wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Cliff. Should we check on Bob?
Yeah, I just texted him in the private chat. Usually he comes on, right? But he may be resting. So we're going to talk about. I do have some links, but if we don't put the QR codes up, I will try and put those links into Facebook later. But please, each of you, plug something. One of you go first.
All right. Well, I mean, obviously, I've got the one book, and it would be great if everyone was interested in and wanted to go find it. But let me plug a new book that Tachyon is publishing in a couple of weeks. Copies have started to ship out. I think there was a launch for it this weekend at MiniCon in Minneapolis, and it's a new novel by Pat Murphy, And it's the
Yay!
adventures. It's the adventures of Mary Darling, and so it is a mashup, very interesting mashup of Peter Pan and Sherlock Holmes. And
I know she's been working on that for a while. That's
yeah,
delightful that it's coming out.
it starts with the disappearance of the kids to Neverland, and Mary Darling is the mother who's been there before, and sets off to rescue her children.
Yeah. Sounds awesome. And that is available for pre-order, I assume.
It's available for pre-order. It'll be out in about 2 weeks. We've actually started shipping copies here because our distributors already shipped 1,500 copies. So
Nice.
they'll be arriving in stores within days, probably.
And I will add that I think it's May 4th. It's the first Sunday in May. Pat Murphy with Karen Joy Fowler will be at SFNSF, hosted by yours truly. And if you're in the Bay Area, you can come. And if you're not in the Bay Area, it will be podcast, the audio version will be podcast. All right. Deborah?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about collaborators, my occupation and resistance novel set on an alien planet, which is inhabited, by a gender fluid race.
It's a cool book. There's a reason it got nominated or finalist for the Wanda.
Yeah. So the inspiration was that most of a year I lived in Lyon and got fascinated by all of the reasons and the timeline for people resisting or collaborating with the Nazis. And because I'm a science fiction writer, it gets framed that way. And in order to talk about power, which is really what the book is about, I had to talk about gender. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is that I do have an epic fantasy trilogy. Let's see.
Oh, yeah.
It's the first volume. And it starts with a scene like the fall of Gondor. The enemy, who are sort of Romans, are at the gate. And my heroine, who is the very young second wife of the king, is off saving the library and ends up with an unexpected magical gift. And it's sort of like if Lord of the Rings had been written by a Jewish woman. With some very, very cool horses that come in the second.
Funny that.
Right. Yeah. So, and I'm working on Swordswoman versus Dinosaurs.
Okay.
And I didn't intend for my nomadic horse people from the second volume of Seven Petaled Shield to come galloping into this, but they did. And there are no mounted archers versus dinosaurs because maybe I'll put that in. Yeah, I'm on the last third right now, and things are getting really exciting.
I think you should put that in. I'm going to affect the future of your book and say, do it. Make it so. Yeah. So I have found the Facebook stream of us right now, and let's see if this works. Boom. And yep, that's the link for Jacob's book has just been put into the chat.
Yay.
And let's see if I can get collaborators.
Yeah. Jacob, what's the elevator pitch for your novel? Anubis on the cover.
It's an unusual book, and actually, it's actually kind of an Exodus story, although it's a small Exodus. So it has a character named the Prophet, who is who's basically a musician, and musicians have the ability sometimes to kind of affect space and time through their
This
music.
is true. I've known a lot of musicians.
Yeah, so it's kind of a history of American popular music. So it takes place over a number of years, mostly, this this century, and so there's there's rock and roll, there's blues, there's jazz. Um, it's a very intricate story with some very odd literary games that me and my collaborator have been playing, and we've been working on this book for a number of years. Have you read it, Cliff?
I am in process
Cool.
of reading it, so
So
enjoying it. Okay.
it's a weird book, right?
Yeah, but you're weird guys, so not surprising.
But if you like
enjoyable.
music,
It's good.
you will find something in it that you will really like.
I look forward to getting there. I will let you know when I get there. All right, I've put in 3 links in the chat. The first is for the Fairwood Press page for Egyptian Motherlode. If you order it direct from Fairwood Press, it is on sale right now, and so that's nice. And Patrick Swenson runs that press. It's a great press. The second link is for collaborators, available in ebook, paperback, and hardcover. But I noticed on Amazon, the hardcover is currently, they have 1 copy on one of those, like, let's get it out of our warehouse sales of $4.83.
Ooh,
So
go buy it.
whoever the first person is to order the hardcover from that link will get it for $4.83. And then the price will go back up because that's the way their algorithm works. And then finally, the link for Alternative Liberties from our host, BQ Press, which is a book that I co-edited with Bob and of 4 or 5 other people. I think 4 other people. It's came out on January 20th, and it's about what we're living through now, kind of through the lens of science fiction and fantasy. So I'm going to thank everyone and try and get Bob to end the live stream, but I don't have the power to do that. So I'm going to ask, I guess normally we end the live stream and then have a goodbye kind of thing to the guests. But unless Bob is about to turn off the live stream, I'm going to just ask folks to log off, and I'll try and reach Bob. I think he's resting. And we all,
Yeah, should we I mean, he's at a con.
Well, he's actually not at the con. He's at home.
He's not at the con.
Yeah, I thought he might be at Norwest Con, but he is not. He's homesick.
Okay.
So I'll give him a call.
Very good.
All right. So thank you all for coming. And Jacob, welcome to the B Cubed podcast family.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Cliff. It's been great.
Yeah, and hope to have you on again. Deborah, great as always. And again, hope to have you on again. All right. I'm heading out.
Lovely to see you, Jacob. Hi, Cliff.
Nice to see you again, Deborah.
Bye-bye.
How do I get? Oh, there we go.
And thank you, audience.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I will. Okay. Is your wife there to help take care of you? Sort of. Okay. Do you need me to try and get you like a ride to see a doctor or anything like that? No. It's not people if I need to. Okay. But thank you. Sure. I mean, there's obviously limited stuff I can do from long distance. Oh, yeah. But no, it's just bummer. But anyway, thank you. I saw my wife Nadia stared at me. I got naked body of it. I can't even make the sound of the night. She patted with a smile, but she suddenly became the beaming beauty of 16 stared at me. The eyes of the woman I loved, the face of a girl I'd never met. Nadia had been striking in the real profession. I could say anything was. Done kept quietly and don't be enthusiastic and skillful, just as you would. What man could refuse such a she asked, bringing the full force of her persuasion to bear. I was weak, but not in the way she expected me. Riding people's sails after I had been lavished twice is a trauma. I said, wondering what the hell my mouth was up to. Was I insane? But the sting of the memory of Ciiff's violation overwhelmed any desire I had, even for the most beautiful goddess in the world. I am not necessarily closed to discussion, however. I added, I understand your power and you wanted to give to me if you were back. But if you cannot erase what Ciiff has done, or hold her to account, perhaps there are other ways in which you can be of service. She rolled herself up proud, returning to a glorious blonde. You were dictate to the goddess of love. Don't be high-handed with me, goddess. I won't. Not after the day I had. The beauty of this negotiation is that if I miss you and have to banish you, I can always wait for a more receptive incarnation to happen by. You wouldn't, she said, scandalized. You have many forms and iterations, I pointed out. That's one of the disadvantages of being warrior, I suppose. I can always wait for the eternal thing, perhaps, and lock you into permanent virginity. I proposed. No, she said, her eyes wide. That incarnation is always so vacuous. Or I can summon your cronish iteration, and you can spend eternity dispensing divine wisdom on animals, I suggested. Madam, please, she begged, her face twisted up. Do you realize what would happen to me if you did that? It would be a disaster. Then stop trying to manipulate me, I demanded, and treat me like a responsible adult. She looked sheepish, like a naughty little girl caught out throwing a tantrum. All right, she mumbled. What do you do? I prepared to be honest. That was all I knew. I was still wary of her manipulation, but at least she wasn't trying to mystify me with her memories anymore. First, can you permanently remove the effects of Ciiff's psychomantic spells? With power of my grace? Yes, she admitted, desperately, but not in earnest. True love conquers all, even sneaky blue magic domination spells, and you do want those problems common. She would have eventually convinced you to do anything she wants, and the more you did, the more you would crave to control. Insidious spell. That's the first condition. Break that spell, every shred. I cannot face her from like Ciiff if I'm subject to her whim. As good as now. She shrugged. I tried to stare at her. Next, you may deserve humanity's interests, I said firmly. You agreed to work together with the other deities I've faced to promote the survival and prosperity of humankind. Now, is she perfectly friendly? Of course. Do I look like a promise of a command? I live to serve humanity, she assured me, while her manner assured me of how that service was performed. Oh, but there are limits, Doctor, I said. Try not to smirk. For our purposes, I will be the judge of whether or not what you do is in service to humanity. Yeah, she snorted. She had the most beautiful nostrils. Who made you the judge of God's model? I did, I said, through clenched teeth. I probably sounded arrogant. I didn't mind. Her scorn was like a wave of magic, and I had to marshal my resources to resist the lure of attempting to appease her. Oh, I will go in and do it. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, page. I just like your potentials. You will get into that. Actually, I'm far more devoted to the study of enchantment and others when I said casual. The art of adjuring political things. I keep that in mind. She said, with a smile, but others that remind you of the greatest work of art of adjuring is the forms, with dramaturges and enchantments. shrank away from her involuntarily, but those magnificent breasts were hypnotic. Thankfully, she used her powers to transform back into Alia, my wife, then young Alia. I do not need to bring your family to break this down, she whispered in my ear as she crawled into my lap. Ishi's bliss is potent enough for that. But are you certain you would not sound the sweetest of your beloved's channels, as if she were a newly blossomed maiden? The young, sweet, tasting lips found my own, and I felt the power of her grace spread through, eliminating the last vestiges of silly smell. And I cannot my head's not all with me. But I had everybody